630 feet above the Mississippi River, on the morning of October 28, 1965, two crews of ironworkers stood on opposite legs of an unfinished arch, close enough now to almost touch across an 8.5-foot gap. That gap was meant to swallow the final piece of the gateway arch, a 10-ton stainless steel triangle, the last section needed to close the structure for good. Except that morning, the gap wasn't 8.5 feet anymore. Overnight cold had given way to a rising sun, and heat had already swollen the south leg enough to shrink the opening by 5 inches. This wasn't a mistake in the design, and it wasn't bad luck. It was ordinary physics, heat expanding ordinary steel, arriving at the worst possible moment. The final piece no longer fit the gap it was built for. And somehow, before the day was out, it still had to go in. To understand how 5 inches could threaten 2.5 years of work, you have to go back to where this story actually started. Not with steel, but with a question nobody had answered yet. Could a structure like this even be built at all? St. Louis had wanted a monument since 1935, when city leaders pushed to honor the westward expansion that had once launched from this exact riverbank. The fur traders, the wagon trains, the steamboats. A national design competition in 1947 drew 172 entries. The winner was a Finnish-born architect named Eero Saarinen, who proposed something no one had ever built: a stainless steel arch, 630 feet tall and 630 feet wide, rising in a single unbroken curve. Saarinen never saw it built. He died of a brain tumor in 1961, about a year and a half before ground was even broken, leaving behind a design that still had to be proven possible. That job fell to the Pittsburgh-Des Moines Steel Company, working beneath general contractor McDonald Construction. Their crew, ironworkers, welders, and riggers under project manager Ken Kolkmeyer, rarely numbered more than 100 people at any one time. None of them had built anything like this, because nothing like it existed yet. They worked without safety harnesses, standard practice on high steel in 1963, climbing bare legs with no scaffolding and no margin for error. Plenty of people outside the project doubted the two legs would ever meet at the top. The crew that built it never did. These were the men climbing exposed steel 600 feet in the air, 5 and sometimes 6 days a week, on shifts that started before the sun cleared the riverbank. And like every construction crew before or since, they had to eat. Not well, not fast, but cheap and filling enough to get a man through 8 hours on bare steel and back again the next morning to do it all over. There's no surviving lunch ticket from the Pittsburgh Des Moines crew. Nobody was keeping menus on a job like this. But we know exactly what working-class St. Louis was eating through the early 1960s, because a lot of it is the same food this city's own grandparents grew up on. Some of what follows is documented as job site food from that era. Some of it belonged to the world these men went home to every night. All of it is the kind of food that got ordinary people through extraordinary work. Subscribe if you've ever eaten because the day demanded it, not because you were hungry. Here are 10 forgotten meals that could have fueled the men who closed the gateway arch. 10. Vienna sausages from a can. Crews had no real break room on a job like this, and most tasks needed both hands until the moment a man actually stopped. Vienna sausages solved that. A can that needed no stove, no prep, opened in seconds with the key soldered onto the lid. A can ran about 19 cents in the mid-1960s. Soft and salty, faintly like ham. Eaten cold straight from the tin with a knife or bare fingers. It wasn't food anyone bragged about, but on a 10-minute break, 600 feet up, it did exactly what it needed to. 9. Saltines with peanut butter. Early shifts meant food had to survive hours in a lunch pail with no refrigeration and no complaint. A box of saltines ran about 19 cents, a jar of peanut butter around 45 cents, and together they stretched across a week of lunches for almost nothing. Dry crunch giving way to thick peanut butter sticking to the roof of your mouth, washed down with whatever coffee was left in the thermos. Plain as it sounds, it was enough fuel to get a man through an 8-hour shift on exposed steel. 8. Fried bologna sandwich. Before a pre-dawn shift, there wasn't time for anything elaborate, just a hot pan and whatever was in the icebox. Bologna ran about 49 cents a pound in 1965, cheap enough to fry up fast and fold onto bread with mustard. The edges curled and went a little dark in the pan, salty and smoky in a way plain lunch meat never quite managed cold. It was a 5-minute meal made by someone who got up before the sun did, same as the man walking out the door to eat it. There's a kind of precision in the story that has nothing to do with food, and it's worth pausing on. Engineers Fred Severode and Hans-Carl Bondel calculated the entire curve of the arch, a shape called a weighted catenary, down to a tolerance of about 1/64th of an inch. The two legs were built independently from opposite ends of the site, with no way to check alignment against each other until they neared the top. If either leg had drifted off its calculated angle by even a small amount, the arch wouldn't have failed dramatically. It would simply have missed. Two towers of stainless steel aimed at a single point 630 feet in the air, with no partial credit for coming close. 7. Canned pork and beans. A can needed no prep and no icebox, which made it a natural fit for a lunch pail that might sit in the sun for hours. It ran about 15 cents in 1965, eaten cold straight from the can or warmed on a hot plate if one was nearby. Thick, sweet salty sauce, soft beans, small pockets of fat throughout. Heavy enough to carry a man through an afternoon of climbing bare steel without another meal in sight. It was about as far from exciting as food got, and it worked anyway. 6. Coffee from the corner diner. Shifts on a job like this started before dawn, and St. Louis had diners near the riverfront that opened early specifically to catch crews heading toward the site. A cup ran a nickel in most diners of the era, with refills that came without asking. Black, neat, bitter, scalding enough to cut through the pre-dawn cold on the walk to work. For some of these men, it was the only warm thing they touched before 8 hours on exposed steel in the open air. 5. Toasted cheese sandwich. After a long shift, a meal that asked almost nothing of a tired man was worth more than one that asked for effort. A pound of American cheese ran about 89 cents in 1965, melted in a buttered skillet until the crust went golden and the inside pulled in strings. It didn't need a recipe, just a hot pan and 5 minutes. This was comfort food built for someone too worn out to want anything complicated, and it never claimed to be more than that. By early 1965, both legs of the arch had reached roughly 530 feet, leaning inward under their own enormous weight, held up by nothing but the strength of the curve itself. Crews lowered a steel truss between the two legs to stop them from swaying while the final sections went up. A temporary brace on a structure that still, technically, wasn't one structure at all. Before construction had even begun, an insurance estimate predicted the project would cost 13 workers their lives. The crew went 500 working days without a single lost time accident. Not because the danger wasn't real, because it was managed, every single day, by people who never once let the height become routine. 4. Grilled pork steak. Pork shoulder, cut into thick bone-in steaks, was one of the cheapest cuts a working family could put on a Saturday grill, a St. Louis and Midwest staple that stretched a smaller budget further than most other meat. It ran about 49 cents a pound in the mid-1960s. Charred at the edges, smoky, tender enough to pull straight off the bone. This wasn't a lunch pail meal. It was the meal a man came home to at the end of a good week, when the work had gone right and there was a little more time to sit down for it. 3. Toasted ravioli. Unlike most of this list, this one has a documented birthplace. The Hill, St. Louis' Italian-American neighborhood, where a kitchen accident in the 1940s turned boiled ravioli into breaded, fried ravioli almost by mistake, and the city never let it go. An order at a Hill restaurant ran about $1 through the 1960s. Crisp fried shell giving way to a soft meat filling, served with red sauce for dipping. This wasn't food a man carried up the arch. It was food he might have eaten on a night off, in a city that had already started inventing its own traditions before the monument gave it a new one. 2. Canned tamales. Sold in general stores and diners across mid-century America, canned tamales were a genuinely common cheap lunch. No cooking required beyond a few minutes on a hot plate, or none at all if a stove wasn't handy. A can ran about 25 cents in 1965. Soft cornmeal wrapping around a spiced meat filling, eaten straight from the tin with a fork if one was around. On a menu built almost entirely out of bread, meat, and beans, it was one of the few things that tasted like it came from somewhere else. By the morning of October 28th, the crew was out of easy options. Firefighters sprayed the swollen south leg with cold water, fighting the same heat that had shrunk the gap in the first place, while riggers forced the two legs apart with a hydraulic jack built for exactly this. 6 inches of clearance, no more. The final section began lifting at 9:28 that morning, a half hour ahead of schedule, because everyone was watching the sun climb and knew what it would do to the steel. The lift took 13 minutes. By 11 o'clock, the last piece dropped into place, and the gateway arch, for the first time in its 630-foot life, became a single, closed structure. Crowds along the riverfront and a city watching on live television had been holding their breath until it did. 1. Gooey butter cake. This one belongs to St. Louis the same way the arch eventually would. It's a documented local invention, the product of a 1930s bakery mistake with a butter-to-flour ratio that should have been a failure, and instead became one of the city's most loved desserts. Butter, sugar, eggs, and cream cheese, ingredients modest enough that almost any home kitchen could manage it. Dense, sweet, a center that never quite fully sets, dusted heavy with powdered sugar on top. It wasn't a meal that fueled anyone through a shift on exposed steel. It was the taste of a city that had already decided, through hard years and good ones, that it still knew how to celebrate something worth celebrating. The Gateway Arch opened to the public in 1967. It has stood since without structural incident, engineered to sway as much as 18 inches in winds up to 150 miles an hour, still holding the exact line 2 separate crews once aimed at, from opposite ends of a riverbank. Most visitors today walk beneath it without a thought for how close it came to not closing at all, or for the men who spent 2.5 years, 500 working days, betting their lives on a margin measured in fractions of an inch, on food that cost pennies and asked nothing but to be eaten fast. Pick one of these, just one. Make it this week, and when it's ready, sit down at the table. Not the couch, the table. Set an actual place for yourself and eat it slow. Tell me in the comments, was it the pork steak or the gooey butter cake? Because none of this was ever really about the food, or even about the arch. It was about ordinary people deciding, one plain meal and one impossible inch at a time, that the work was worth finishing.